By the spring of 1945, the skies over Germany no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. They belonged to the enemy. Every morning, the horizon filled with silver specks that grew into roaring armadas. American bombers wrapped in clouds of fighter escorts. The sound came first a deep, rolling thunder that rattled windows, cracked nerves, and reminded every German citizen that the war was already lost in the air. But deep inside hidden concrete bunkers and forest-covered airstrips, Germany was preparing a final, desperate gamble, an aircraft so fast, so radical, and so terrifying that it seemed torn straight from the future. Its name was Messerschmitt Me-163 Komet. It did not roar like other fighters, it screamed. Powered by rocket fuel instead of propellers or jet turbines, the Me-163 climbed like a missile, accelerated faster than anything in the sky, and vanished before enemy pilots could even react. On paper, it was unstoppable. Allied intelligence called it the most dangerous interceptor ever built. German propaganda called it the weapon that would turn the war. But waiting above Germany were the P-51 Mustangs, sleek, long-range killers flown by battle, hardened American pilots who had learned, the hard way, that speed alone did not win dogfights. What followed were some of the strangest, shortest, and most uneven air battles in aviation history. Rocket planes versus propeller fighters, future technology versus experience, desperation versus discipline. This is the story of the day the fastest fighter in the world met the most deadly escort fighter ever built, and why speed was not enough. By 1943, the Luftwaffe was bleeding to death. Once the undisputed master of European skies, it now faced a nightmare it had helped create. The Allies had learned. Their bombers no longer flew unescorted. Their tactics improved with every mission. And worst of all for Germany, American industry was producing aircraft faster than German pilots could be trained or replaced. Every week, hundreds of B-17s and B-24s crossed into German airspace, bombing factories, oil refineries, rail yards, and cities with growing precision. German interceptors climbed to meet them, fought desperately, and died in growing numbers. Traditional fighters were failing. The Bf-109 and F-190, once lethal predators, were now outnumbered, outranged, and outflown by American escorts, especially the P-51 Mustang. With its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, drop tanks, and exceptional high-altitude performance, the Mustang could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. It hunted German fighters aggressively, ambushing them during climb, chase, and landing. For Luftwaffe pilots, survival became a matter of minutes. Germany needed something radical. The answer came not from fighter doctrine, but from rocket science. Professor Alexander Lippisch had been experimenting with tailless aircraft designs since the 1930s. His concept promised extreme speed and climb rate, perfect for intercepting bombers quickly before escorts could react. When paired with rocket propulsion, the result was revolutionary. Unlike jets, rockets did not need oxygen from the air. They delivered instant, violent thrust. The Me-163 Komet was born. On its first powered flight, it stunned observers. The aircraft leapt off the runway, climbed almost vertically, and vanished into the clouds. Test pilots reported speeds beyond 600 mph, numbers that defied belief in 1944. No Allied fighter could touch it. No bomber could outrun it. In theory, a single Komet could slash through an entire bomber formation in seconds. But theory is not war. The Komet's engine burned a volatile mixture of STOF and T-STOF and C-STOF. Fuels so unstable that even a small leak could melt metal or explode on contact. Pilots wore special rubberized suits, more like hazmat gear than flight uniforms, because a fuel spill during landing could dissolve human flesh. Ground crews worked in constant fear. Aircraft were lost before ever reaching combat. Still, Germany pressed on. By mid-1944, the first operational Me-163 unit, Jagdgeschwader 400, was activated. Its mission was simple: climb faster than anything, strike bombers at impossible speeds, and escape before escorts could respond. But waiting for them were men who had already learned how to kill faster aircraft. ENTRTHE P-51 Mustang, American Mustang pilots did not fear speed. By 1944, many had survived dozens of missions over hostile territory. They had seen German aces die. They had learned patience, teamwork, and above all, situational awareness. The P-51 was not the fastest aircraft in the sky, but it was balanced, reliable, in deadly and skilled hands. It could dive fast, turn tight, and, most importantly, stay in the air for hours. That endurance would matter. Mustang pilots quickly noticed strange sightings over Germany. Aircraft that climbed like rockets, streaked past bombers, fired once or twice, and disappeared downward at incredible speed. Reports described silver bullets, fireballs, and rocket fighters. At first, Allied intelligence dismissed them as exaggerations. Then bombers began falling apart mid-air. A single Me-163 attack could rip through a bomber box in seconds. Its 230 number cannons fired shells capable of destroying a B-17 with one hit. But the Komet had a fatal flaw. It had only minutes of powered flight. After one or two passes, fuel was gone. The aircraft became a glider. That was the moment the P-51s waited for. Teach T-ROP and TSKY, Mustang pilots adapted quickly. Instead of chasing the Me-163 during its powered climb, an impossible task, they began watching the descent. A fuel-empty Komet was fast but helpless, unable to maneuver aggressively or accelerate. Worse still, it had no engine power to escape once engaged. American pilots learned to orbit above known Komet bases. They waited. When a Me-163 finished its attack and began gliding back toward its airfield, Mustangs pounced. Many Komets were destroyed while landing, vulnerable, slow, and defenseless. Some were shot down mere seconds after touching the ground. Others exploded due to residual fuel igniting under fire. Speed had become a curse. German pilots began to realize the truth too late. The Me-163 was terrifying, but it fought alone. No escorts. No second chance. No room for mistakes. Against disciplined P-51 squadrons, the Komet was not a war winner. It was a one-strike weapon in a war that demanded endurance. And yet when the two met head-on in the sky, the encounter was unlike anything World War II had ever seen. T momentio of Conte CT. Imagine being a Mustang pilot at 25,000 feet, scanning the sky, when something climbs past you at nearly twice your speed, leaving a white vapor trail and a roar that shakes your cockpit. Your reflexes scream danger, but your instruments tell you the impossible has just happened. That was the Me-163, no turning fight. No warning. Just a flash. Cannon fire and gone. For a few seconds, technology from the future ruled the present, but seconds were all it ever had. By late 1944, the skies over central Germany had become a hunting ground, unlike any other in the war. Above the shattered cities and burning factories, two completely different philosophies of air combat collided. On one side were the American P-51 Mustang pilots, methodical, patient, trained to survive and fight as a unit. On the other were the Me-163 Komet pilots alone, racing against time, flying an aircraft that could kill them even if the enemy didn't. Every encounter between them lasted seconds, yet each second felt like eternity. The first confirmed clashes were chaotic. Mustang pilots initially tried to chase the Komets during their climb, instinctively pushing throttles forward, engines screaming as they clawed upward. It was hopeless. The Me-163 didn't climb, it launched. In less than 2 minutes, it could go from runway to bomber altitude, streaking past escorts before anyone could react. American pilots described it as trying to chase a bullet with a horse. In those moments, the Komet was untouchable, and its pilots felt invincible, if only briefly. But that invincibility came at a terrifying cost. Inside the Komet's cockpit, the pilot was surrounded by danger. The rocket engine thundered just inches behind him, its volatile fuel sloshing in tanks that could explode from a hard maneuver or rough landing. The aircraft vibrated violently at full thrust, controls growing stiff as speed climbed past anything the pilot had ever known. There was no room for error, no margin for panic. One wrong move and the aircraft could disintegrate, not from enemy fire, but from itself. When a Me-163 attacked a bomber formation, it did so with brutal speed. Pilots aimed in a single firing pass, cannon shells tearing through aluminum skins, wings snapping, engines exploding. A B-17 might vanish in a flash of fire, before its gunners could even track the attacker. Survivors reported seeing comets flash past, so fast they couldn't tell if it was one aircraft or several. For bomber crews, it felt like being attacked by something supernatural. Yet the Mustangs were watching. Always watching. American squadron leaders began issuing new instructions. Do not chase the rocket fighter on climb. Do not break formation. Mark the direction of descent. The P-51's strength was not raw speed, it was time. Mustang pilots could stay airborne for hours, circling, waiting, conserving fuel. They learned the Komet's secret weakness. Once the rocket burned out, the fight flipped completely. When the Mi-163's engine cut off, the cockpit went suddenly quiet. The violent roar vanished, replaced by wind noise and silence. The aircraft was now a glider, fast but fragile, unable to regain altitude or accelerate. The pilot, moments earlier the fastest thing in the sky, became prey. And that was when the P-51 struck. Mustangs dove from above, engines howling, sunlight flashing off wings as they closed in. Komet pilots tried desperate evasive maneuvers, but without power, every turn bled speed they could not afford to lose. Some attempted to hug the ground, skimming treetops and fields, hoping anti-aircraft guns near their bases would scare the Americans away. Others aimed straight for their landing strips, knowing that the final approach was the most dangerous moment of all. Many never made it. One Mustang pilot recalled watching a Komet touch down, its skid scraping the runway, only to erupt in flames seconds later as machine gunfire ignited leftover fuel. Another described seeing a rocket fighter explode mid-air after a single .50 caliber burst punctured a fuel tank. The irony was cruel. The most advanced interceptor ever built was often destroyed after its mission was over. For the German pilots, morale began to crack. They were told they were flying a miracle weapon, yet casualties mounted with frightening speed. Unlike conventional fighters, there was no chance to fight your way out, no wingman to cover you, no engine to save you if things went wrong. Every sortie felt like a suicide run. Some pilots admitted later that they feared landing more than combat itself. Still, the Mi-163 scored kills. Bombers fell. Crews died. And every successful interception reminded the Allies that Germany was still capable of shocking innovation. American intelligence took the threat seriously, studying wreckage, interrogating prisoners, analyzing tactics. The conclusion was blunt: the Komet was deadly, but unsustainable. It demanded perfect conditions, flawless execution, and pilots willing to gamble their lives on a few minutes of flight. Meanwhile, the P-51s adapted further. Squadrons began flying Komet patrols, loitering near known rocket bases instead of staying close to bombers. They attacked on landing, on climb out, even on the ground when possible. The Mustang had become not just an escort fighter, but an executioner, turning Germany's last gamble into a liability. By early 1945, encounters between Mi-163s and P-51s had become symbols of the war itself: speed versus strategy, innovation versus experience, desperation versus control. In every clash, the rocket fighter burned bright and died young. The Mustang endured, but the final verdict on the Mi-163 was still to come. By early 1945, Germany was no longer fighting for victory, it was fighting for time. The cities lay in ruins, fuel was almost gone, and experienced pilots were either dead or exhausted beyond repair. Into this collapsing world flew the Mi-163 Komet, a weapon born too late, too extreme, and too unforgiving for the reality it faced. What was once advertised as a miracle interceptor had become a symbol of desperation, flown by men who understood that survival depended less on skill than on luck. Inside Jagdgeschwader 400, the unit tasked with operating the Komets, pilots lived under constant tension. Every mission briefing carried the same unspoken question: will the aircraft kill me before the enemy does? They strapped themselves into cockpits surrounded by volatile fuel, knowing that a rough landing, a stray bullet, or even a mechanical fault could mean instant death. Veterans later admitted that morale was fragile. Some pilots volunteered out of loyalty or belief, others because there were no alternatives left. When Mi-163s rose to intercept bomber formations in the final months of the war, the battles were shorter and more brutal than ever. Allied air superiority was overwhelming. P-51 Mustangs filled the skies in numbers the Luftwaffe could no longer counter. Even when Komets managed to score kills, the strategic impact was negligible. One bomber destroyed meant little when hundreds more followed. The rocket fighter was a scalpel trying to stop a tidal wave. American pilots, by contrast, flew with growing confidence. They respected the Mi-163, but they no longer feared it. By now, Mustang squadrons knew exactly what to do. They waited. They watched. And when the rocket engine died, they moved in with cold precision. Some pilots later said the encounters felt unfair, almost tragic. The Komet pilots had courage, but no chance. Technology had given them speed, but taken away everything else. As the war collapsed, many Mi-163s never even made it into combat. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft. Bombed airfields destroyed infrastructure. Some Komets were captured intact by advancing Allied forces, their sleek shapes astonishing engineers, who realized they were looking at the future of aviation, arriving wrapped in the failure of the present. What Germany had built in desperation, the post-war world would study in calm. The final encounters between Mi-163s and P-51s were less about combat and more about survival. German pilots tried to avoid Mustangs altogether, flying lower, launching fewer sorties. American pilots continued their patrols, knowing the end was near. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the Mi-163 faded into silence, not with a decisive victory, but with unanswered questions. In the aftermath, the verdict was clear. The Mi-163 was the fastest fighter of World War II, a technological marvel decades ahead of its time. But war is not won by speed alone. It is won by logistics, training, adaptability, and numbers. The P-51 Mustang embodied all of those. It was not revolutionary, but it was reliable, and reliability won the air war. The legacy of the Mi-163 did not end in failure. Rocket propulsion, high-speed aerodynamics, and interceptor concepts influenced Cold War aircraft and spaceflight. Engineers learned what worked, and what never should be repeated. Pilots remembered the Komet not as a wonder weapon, but as a warning innovation. Without strategy is just a faster way to lose. And so, when historians look back at the rare moments when Mi-163s battled P-51s, they see more than dogfights. They see the moment the future met the present and lost. The rocket burned bright, screamed through the sky, and vanished. The Mustang stayed, because in the end, wars are not won by miracles. They are won by men, machines, and the ability to fight again tomorrow. As the smoke cleared over Europe and the guns finally fell silent, the sky told its own story. The Mi-163 Komet, faster than anything humanity had ever flown, proved that raw speed could not replace strategy. It screamed through the heavens like a message from the future, but the future was not ready for it. Below, the P-51 Mustang returned home again and again, steady, reliable, victorious. So ask yourself this: was the Mi-163 too advanced for World War II? Or was it proof that technology alone can never win a war? If you enjoy untold World War II stories like this, where innovation meets reality, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. Because the next story might change how you see history forever.